Good morning, everybody, and you're all very welcome to this InterTradeIreland All-Ireland Innovation Programme event. This event is part of a series of online Industry 4.0 events that ourselves in NUI Galway, along with our partners in Queen's University Belfast, UCC and DCU are running. And each event focuses on a particular theme or a particular sector. And of course, today's event is focusing on the healthcare industry. And Industry 4.0 is really a concept that was introduced in 2010, 2011 by the German ministry when they were developing an industry strategy. And it really focuses, there's numerous definitions of Industry 4.0, but it really focuses or captures the automation of manufacturing and industrial practices by using smart technology like the Internet of Things, by using big data analytics or robotics, for example. And the whole idea behind the concept really is to increase productivity, efficiency, cost effectiveness, and to provide new business opportunities, which of course is particularly important to SMEs. So as I said, today's event is going to focus on Industry 4.0 with respect to the healthcare industry. And it's brought to you today in collaboration between InterTradeIreland, the Western Development Commission and the Whitaker Institute at NUI Galway. And we have panellists that are going to look at the different aspects of the healthcare industry. Unfortunately, Shane Loughlin from SL Controls, due to circumstances completely beyond his control, can't attend this morning's event. But I'm delighted to welcome Dr. Hugh Cormican and Professor Mary Murphy. And hopefully in the future, Shane will be able to give us his insights and thoughts on Industry 4.0 that we'll be able to get to you. So Dr. Hugh Cormican is the CEO and founder of Cirdan, and Cirdan are based in Northern Ireland, and they focus on providing smart solutions around clinical laboratory testing. So Hugh is going to be able to provide that perspectives on the diagnostic side. Professor Mary Murphy is from NUI Galway, and she's a leading researcher and principal investigator in the area of stem cell production and stem cells for therapy. So she will be able to provide the therapeutics side of healthcare. And her research looks at the automation and the production of stem cells in a sustainable and cost-effective way. So the way we'll structure the event is that first I'll ask some opening questions of the panel so that they can give their perspectives. And I'd be delighted to take your questions that you may have and that I can put to the panelists. So you'll see a chat function just below the where the video is. And you can just join that chat to either ask a question or to see what other people are asking as well. And just to note that if you want to ask a question anonymously, you can do that after joining the particular chat. So I think we'll kick off and we'll welcome Hugh and Mary. And Hugh, a very good morning to you. And how are you doing? Good?
Yes, good morning. Yes,
right.
It's nice and sunny and bright here in Lisbon.
Yeah, the same here for a change in the west of Ireland. So maybe if we just start with yourself, Hugh, and a bit of background to Cirdan, and I suppose when Cirdan was established and how the technology around clinical laboratory testing has changed over the years at Cirdan.
Yeah, so Cirdan was formed in 2010. There was a number of the founders of the company, including myself. We had worked previously for a company in Northern Ireland, which was very successful in research imaging, sold a lot of cameras to university government labs and for research purposes from astronomy to microscopy. But we felt really that the medical imaging, there was a lot of that technology was taking too long to get into the hands of people and was value in that technology with that imaging technology that could be accelerated and developed. We decided to choose the pathology market, and there's a lot of obviously work in imaging and radiology, but surprisingly pathology has probably more imaging involved in it, and it's more complex imaging, and there was a lot more opportunity for our business to grow and develop. So we started developing products for that. And as we developed those products, it became very clear that the reason why imaging wasn't being managed well within pathology was there was a major deficit in the infrastructure of the informatics of laboratories, and that's where we got involved in developing a LIMS or a LIS system to be able to develop and support the images, incorporate images, manage images, and all of that had to be part and parcel of the solution. So that then involved us setting up the company and focusing and pivoting very much onto the laboratory informatics solutions. And as we've come on, we've continued to develop imaging for specific clinical pathways, and also look to develop the infrastructure in the laboratory information systems to be able to cope with the labs. So we've grown, and although we're a small SME here in Ireland, we have a global outreach. We have offices in the outskirts of Melbourne, Australia, and on the outskirts of Toronto in Canada. And we have customers across 6 different continents. And although as a company, we always look to be global and have a global outlook in our business. So, as a business, we developed globally and partnership, and a lot of partnerships with university, which we see is very important to the development of our business. And the company now, we feel, is poised to go through quite a major growth, and we hope to be a very major recognized player in the international laboratory information markets in the coming years. And we're quite happy. We're up to about 100 employees now, and we certainly see that doubling or trebling in the next 5 years.
That's really impressive growth since 2010. What would you say are the kind of future technologies that are really going to change clinical laboratory testing, or what kind of changes do you think technology is?
Well, I think the key thing to understand is pathology is the core of all the ologies in medical science. It's 70% of diagnosis done in pathology lab, but 95% of all clinical pathways involve pathology. And increasingly, pathology has become less of a science that's stuck in the lab. It needs to be very well connected to those clinical pathways in the community and in the hospitals and in the GPs. Things like, helping to early diagnose potential patients who may be, they're likely to suffer from diabetes or chronic liver injury or chronic kidney injury. And if by intercepting early those patients and understanding those conditions, you can, be able to be much more effective in treating those patients and be able to be obviously save a lot of healthcare costs for our company or a country in terms of, involving having to reduce a lot of the work that would be required in treating patients after they develop chronic illnesses based on being able to catch them earlier. So it's been able to be out there and connect to those clinical pathways. And a key part of that now has been really opened up and enabled with the new IT technologies. Mobile connectivity, there's new infrastructures in the web, IoT. All of these things feed into an environment and to the climate where you can actually connect a lot of these pathways to, a lot of the technology out there, and in a way which is very effective and very efficient, which means then that you can have much better insights into that data that comes from those things and be able to feed that back and help that feed those clinical pathways. So we see a very exciting future in terms of how we progress the data analytics side of this with that new technology in combination with the traditional lab work we do. And the lab work we cover, the labs, they look after all the disciplines, biochemistry, hematology, microbiology, histopathology. But increasingly, like I say, it's much more clinical pathway focused, and being able to respond to that is becoming more and more important. And there's a really untapped potential in pathology labs to be able to secure and improve the healthcare. There's obviously the precision medicine agenda, which means that there's more testing required. But if that testing, there's a lot more effectiveness in what the results of that can be. And that's very much how we see our business developing along the Industry 4.0 agenda in those areas.
So can you give an example maybe of how, data can be used to make it more efficient? Like how, for myself, that's not in pathology or a scientist in this area, like how how could data kind of improve the way things are?
Well, with a simple addition of some data sets, you can actually add a lot of insight into, the performance of systems. For example, we have in our product, you can now collect information at a collection centre where you would draw blood from a patient for testing using an iPad, for example, or an Android device. That mobile device, you can also then interrogate its geocode. So you know where that sample's been taken. So then you know how long it's going to take to get to the lab. If there's sometimes that there's problems with samples, is because they've been too long getting transferred to the lab. Suddenly you have an insight into where that lab, the distances where those samples are. A lab can see an insight into where their samples are. And in a typical morning, people not feeling well, they go to the GP. The GP starts to order tests. The lab doesn't quite often currently know what's happening until the tests start appearing or the samples start appearing in the reception. By having that collection and outreach, they can start to see where those tests are, understand the nature of those tests, and they can respond much better to the changes in the patterns. And then they can start to see patterns and things that are at a much lower level. For example, if a particular GP area, you find that there's several cases of salmonella poisoning, suddenly, at a very low level, you can start to spot trends of maybe there's a local carryout that's maybe responsible for this, or there may be insights that is a lot more valuable just by knowing the geolocation of where these samples are, where they're taken from, and then how they affect the business downstream. And having that information is a very simple piece of information to add to the laboratory information system, but opens up a whole opportunity in terms of insights into what that data can be used for.
Mm-hmm. That's really interesting. And are there any kind of barriers or risks around kind of the holding of big data and that side of things, and the regulations, and even as you have your company is internationalized, you're dealing with different kind of regulatory bodies and that. Does that affect things much?
Yeah, well, as a company, we have to invest obviously in sort of regulatory approval, and a lot of the requirements of GDPR versus HIPAA in the States, and there's a lot of common themes in there, and so we have to secure our data and secure patient information, but being able to then extract information that's anonymized, for example, and take and look at the analysis of that in a proper way is something that's very important to us. But although there's sort of local variations, the intent is pretty much the same. Is that people want to keep the data secure, and so if you're meeting locally in Europe, GDPR actually is probably at the forefront of all the other regulatory people and across different parts of the world, particularly like say Australia, New Zealand, or even the US. We find that if we keep right within GDPR, we're pretty well covered for that. But there is a hurdle there that you have to, and a regulatory threshold you have to achieve to be able to secure that information and make sure that it's secure.
Then, obviously, as the company has evolved, and it seems like the core competence of the company has evolved, it requires new kind of skill sets. I mean, have you had to hire new talent, or is it about kind of upskilling the employees that you have, or how do you manage that?
The core of our business, our clinical analysts or people who've worked in laboratories, they've done testing, they know, they're biomedical scientists, they know microbiology, they know hematology, and they're core to our business. But I mean, with that, we've had to supplement them with people with, obviously managing with IT. Obviously, we develop a software product, so we have software developers in our business. But recently, also adding people who have, data analytics and training in terms of machine learning and grooming algorithms and training algorithms. I call it grooming, and it's maybe the wrong word, but and developing algorithms and managing algorithms to be able to provide insights into data and provide efficiencies into how they manage that data is something very important. So we've had to add more data analytics people, but fundamentally, a key thing is they need to understand the domain, they need to understand that bench, and they need to understand what that tests are, and that gets back to the lab analysts, and they're core to the business. What exactly the biomedical scientists need to do and how they can do that. We can help supplement them and support them, but we need those people to help see where there are opportunities and how they can use that new information. But really, it's the main knowledge in that pathology labs, which is critical to our business.
Yeah, so it's really a kind of a merging of competencies that you need in people, like the clinical side and also the kind of data analytics side.
Yes.
Yeah. And I suppose, Industry 4.0 is very much focused on technology and, SMEs and businesses taking advantage, I suppose, or seeing the opportunities in technology. And I suppose an area that I teach is entrepreneurship. And when we talk about an entrepreneur developing a business idea, we talk about the balance between market pull and technology push. Is there, I suppose, from your perspective, as a founder of a company, is there a balance there that needs to be struck? Like, there's a danger, I suppose, with Industry 4.0 that you could overly focus on the technology and not be kind of business led. Do you think that's a kind of a risk or a danger for businesses?
Yeah, well, fundamentally, as ever, it comes back to the pain of the customer. It's really understanding what the customer in that domain knowledge needs. The technology provides tools to help you ease that pain and to provide insights and be able to improve their effectiveness, efficiency. But, fundamentally, it's knowing that market and knowing that domain. Traditionally, in the past, one of the things, you would have seen is that, maybe, new technology develops in a university setting. That technology, what happens is that you get a spin-out company who focuses on that technology or that particular, like machine learning, for example. And then that machine learning, they try and offer that to different domains. Really now, a lot of the time, I see a lot of that technology is going straight from university into the companies that actually know the domain. They know the market. They know the solution. The pace of development of that technology is so fast now that close collaboration between, universities and the small companies allow the transfer of that, and they can focus on the domain, where the important thing is what can that technology do for the customer. And that's critical to the success of businesses. And in Ireland, we need to focus on how we can, channel that information from the universities into small businesses who can take that for the domains that they're focused on and have knowledge and have experience with, that they can then build on it and use that technology effectively and do that and hopefully with a positive framework support from industry around them, and including, I think, that the government services need to be more proactive in helping encourage businesses and integrate with them. I think it's something like HSE in the South needs to focus more on how they can work with small businesses to enable that technology to improve their efficiencies, but also help support local industries particularly.
And on that note, you mentioned HSE and all of that. Like, are your customers primarily like headquartered or?
We have a mixture of public and private pathology labs. So, in the UK, we have NHS. We don't do a lot with the HSE. We have some private companies and private pathology labs in Ireland, but like Eurofins, but we don't have the connections in the HSE. I think the HSE, as an organisation, needs to think about how it can help support local Indigenous industries better. I spent a number of years in the US, and I was very impressed there. The very receptive attitude of government agencies to small businesses. They, of course, have the SBIR scheme, which I think is fundamentally successful, where, any government agency has to support local businesses and has to spend a portion of their budget on that. And, I think it's really getting that channel between how, we can get a collaboration between the likes of, university in Galway with the company like ourselves and with the HSE. We can do a lot for them, and there needs to be help, support, a mechanism and a framework to help encourage that much better. And I think that's something that we need to focus on.
Great, thank you. And that provides a nice segue, I suppose, into Professor Mary Murphy. And if I could bring Mary into the conversation, because of course, Mary, you're based in NUI Galway. And your research is not more obviously on the therapeutic side in stem cell production. Maybe if we start first before we get into kind of industry-university collaboration, but if you might want to tell us a little bit about your research on producing stem cells.
Thank you, Majella. I'd be very happy to tell you something about our research. So I've worked on stem cells both in industry for 9 years with the first stem cell worldwide initially, and then bringing that technology to Galway and establishing the capacity to, first of all, do basic research on these cells, these mesenchymal stem cells or MSCs, but also, again, coming from the company perspective, start to produce these cells in a way that gets increasingly more economical over time. So the cells can be used for many diseases. They have the capacity to modulate osteoarthritis, which is my favorite disease. And we have worked with the cells on that, to the point of being in a phase 2 clinical trial currently throughout Europe, led by Professor Frank Barry here in Galway. But addressing this disease for patients who are at the point of getting a total joint replacement. And that's just one of the diseases that the cells can treat. There are many others. And as such, you need a lot of them. Many, many, many millions to be effective for just one patient. And if you want to address a population with osteoarthritis, you're talking about billions and billions of cells. So over the years, we've developed manufacturing protocols at the bench level. And this is what's being used for the current clinical trials. We have a good manufacturing facility here in Galway, so we can produce the cells, and producing them at this sort of manual level is extraordinarily expensive. So there was always an imperative to address this. And about 6 years ago, we took up a collaboration with the Institute for Production Technology in Aachen in Germany, the IPT Fraunhofer organization. And they had begun to venture into looking at induced pluripotent stem cells and the automated generation of these cells, again, for ultimate use in therapy. So we worked with the IPT and developed additional partners, and were funded for the AutoStem project initially. And this was to set up an automated program, I suppose factory, essentially, a small factory for these MSCs. And we were able to achieve that in the 4 years. It took a lot of work. We worked for the company in Galway, Crossbon at the time, and they were able to actually develop an automated system for taking the raw material, and the raw material in this case is bone marrow. Mm-hmm. So this company in Galway were able to automatically, without exposure to the environment, take the raw material, send it with the system that we developed in Aachen, send it there, and then at the point that it arrived in Aachen, again, this was sent into the little manufacturing facility. It's half the size of my office. It's really streamlined. You're talking about reduced size. It's fully closed. It's capable of achieving what we call a grade A level containment, and that's the highest grade that you need for open processing of cells. But it can also, where you can work with cells in a closed manner, achieve grades D. So it's fully functional as a miniature good manufacturing practice facility. And we have looked at the economics of this, not in a very sustained way, but we firmly believe that at least just looking at the production itself, it's going to be a much more less expensive way of producing the cells, getting it to patients more easily and more quickly, and addressing these diseases that we would like to cover.
Really interesting development, I suppose, in the area of therapy. For and as you said, I presume for multiple diseases. It's not just like one particular disease. And you mentioned Crossbon getting involved in this. So this was in kind of early stage research, I suppose. Crossbon got involved. I mean, how did it come about that Crossbon became collaborated with you on this project?
Well, we just got together a consortium to get funding from the Horizon 2020, and we're very lucky to be successful. And Crossbon, along with a few other SMEs in Ireland, were there with the technology that would directly help us to develop a closed automated system with no exposure to the environment, safer, and again, amenable to technology 4.0 when we put it into our automated factory, which currently is in Germany still. And we are now looking to find partners in Ireland, and we've had discussions with a few SMEs with experience in automation here, so that we can actually develop an automated factory in Ireland somewhere, whether in Galway or Dublin.
Okay. So there are kind of opportunities for SMEs then, like business opportunities around this, you would foresee?
Oh, absolutely. Yes. They can change the hardware, make it more amenable. So there's certainly opportunities for companies working at that level. Mm-hmm. There are, in the more recent project, subsequent to Autocrat, we developed a consortium that is going to the next level, moving from bone marrow derived cells to induced pluripotent stem cells, which is a much cheaper and a much more sustainable way of producing the cells that we use therapeutically. And we also, when we had our first AutoStem robotic factory, we produced cells there. Another element of the work that we do is that those cells produce and secrete factors, sometimes called extracellular vesicles, that are therapeutic. So in the new factory, we're expanding to go from induced pluripotent stem cells, produce our MSCs, as well as other cells, such as chondrocytes, but then take what these cells spit out every day, to actually take that and create a therapeutic that will be easier to get through regulatory authorities, because it's not a cell product, it's a cell-derived product. Okay. And that introduced a company in Dublin to us, Cell, and they develop systems for monitoring our cells, for example, but also monitoring what they produce. They use fluorescence polarization, for example, in that context. And so we are now working with them to automate the control of the system and the validation of what we produce. And so just examples like that. It's working with the people who have the technology and can automate it in a way that is sustainable, again, leading to less and less expensive product and more availability to patients ultimately.
Yeah. Very interesting. It's incredible, the impact that can have on various therapies. In terms of the, any kind of challenges or issues you would find with, obviously, businesses come with a different kind of focus around more commercialization, and university is more around basic research. I suppose the industry is more around applied research and commercialization. Does that create any challenges that you have seen in working with industry on this?
I think it can be challenging, yes, but once you get your upfront contracts right, it works out. Okay. And again, that is very possible. And they provide a whole new field for us in academia, and open up our eyes to how things can be improved even more. So it's a very effective way of developing new systems, certainly automated systems.
Yeah. And Hugh, you have, if I just bring you in here too, Hugh, you have said that your business and Cirdan have engaged with universities. Has that been a way for you to access like new technologies and new knowledge, I suppose, and incorporate it? Have you found that as a useful way?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's fundamental that you need to be up to date and current in the technology you deliver to your customers, and some of that technology. I think that the sort of time from bringing that from tradition from more pure research in universities to applied research into commercial development is a lot shorter. So you really need to pay attention to the universities and work with them. So we have worked up in the north here. There's a scheme called the KTP scheme, Knowledge Transfer Scheme, where an academic, through the medium of a student, will transfer knowledge to a company. They have been very successful. We've also had various research programs that we've had with universities in terms of developing technology. And like I say, increasingly, I think a lot of businesses they've waited until things have come out and exploited them downstream. But I think, as a business, you need to be much more aware of what's going on in the universities and what's happening there, and be involved in that as much as you can.
And if I can ask you, Hugh, like your company is obviously hugely innovative, and you've looked at these opportunities and engaging with universities and that. Like, what are they, how do you, I suppose, develop, do you need that kind of culture of innovation, and how do you develop that within an organization? I suppose, what would an organization need to do internally in order to take the opportunities that are there for around technology and in universities, etc.?
Well, I think it's fundamental. You have to get your culture right, and we actually do some effort into work to try and make sure we do. So, we discuss it, we outline it, we talk about the values that help underpin that culture, and how we can promote innovation and encourage innovation, and important things like being open-minded, to new ideas, not to be dismissive of new ideas, to investigate and support people with new ideas, to see where they can go. And that culture is important to a company, and particularly, to companies in this environment. And as we go forward in the future, as technology is going to evolve faster, I think it's very important that you have that attitude and culture built into your business. So it is something you need to focus on, that you have to spend some effort and time. It's not something that just comes naturally. You do have to work on it, and it does at times in danger of going off the rails. So you do need to actually keep an eye on it and make sure you keep that focus on it.
So do you have to look kind of internally first before you start looking externally to make sure that you have kind of, proper, I suppose, procedures in place, and that is going to allow you as an SME to engage in Industry 4.0?
Yeah, well, I mean, generic. I mean, I spend a lot of time. I also do some angel investments, and I'm interested in encourage entrepreneurship. But I always tell people, start with passion. You need to be passionate about it, and if you have an employee who's passionate about an idea, to support them. So you need, the passion has to come first. With the passion, then you need to think about who are the people that that help you support that passion in the university, in maybe a client or a customer, and develop those relationships with those people and those networks that help, that maybe share that passion, and then you can think about the products and what the products you have to develop. But I mean, I think it's less about, making sure that the culture and the environment is right, less about processes and the processes come in, if you want to talk about, commercial ventures, about making sure, that your idea has legs. But, we try and touch the process. We have processes we have as part of our regulatory environment we have to comply with. But I mean, it's more about the people and the passion that I think we need to focus on. Yeah. As any new business startup, or as any business, you must keep that and never lose sight of the fact that there's that passion, and how those passionate, you connect those to other people with that passion, that you can deliver something.
Great, thank you. There's a couple of questions coming in here, and there's one for Mary here. How can SMEs become involved in university research or engage in collaboration? So you mentioned a few collaborations, and Mary, already. But what advice would you give SMEs that maybe are looking to engage with the university on research and technology development?
My advice is to go and find out who you could engage with first. There are certainly many mechanisms to engage with people in Ireland. Certainly, Enterprise Ireland is a very good mechanism for funding and engaging with academic centres. We generally have come across people through initiatives like that, where we've dealt with SMEs as partners in different projects, and then we would develop the major projects, the major EU projects, including them at that point in time. So I think maybe look at the university websites and the centres within the universities in Ireland and Northern Ireland, and see what research is going on, where they can find a partner to work with. For instance, we have had communications with Myra GTX, it's a new SME, just started up in Shannon, again working on gene therapy, stem cell therapy. And just, so I think it behoves us in academia to watch out as to who's coming in to the field that you're working in. But also, I think SMEs that are interested in getting funding to progress an aspect of their technology, for example, appropriate to automation in our case, we would be very happy to engage with them. And I think Enterprise Ireland maybe can match also. And that's another way of implementing the initiation of partnerships.
Yeah, great, thank you. Hugh, there's a couple of questions here that I'll put to you on. What would you see are the barriers and the risks to implementing an Industry 4.0 solution?
Well, you mentioned one of the earlier about sort of PPI, sort of patient private information, securing that information, and a better connected world. There's obviously risks, and you have to invest then in cybersecurity. You have to invest in the work that has to be in to secure the information and ensure that that it's not at risk. So there's certainly issues about how that information is secured. And we invest time and effort into looking after that information in a very appropriate way. I think that our problem is usually that unfortunately, particularly if we're looking at the public sector, both the NHS and HSE labs, their day-to-day business, they don't get any time to be able to look at future work. It's all about doing the work they have, and they have. They're driven not to look at doing the business that they've been doing for a long time, and not to look at maybe the solutions that could save them in the future and create efficiencies for them. They don't get that incentives. They don't get that time to look at those opportunities. And so engaging with some of those organizations is difficult. And I think, that there needs to be government intervention there probably to try and encourage more of that. That would be a very positive thing. But people are busy, and so busy that they haven't time to engage and how they improve what they're doing and make what they're doing better is something which I see as a barrier which could be addressed and should be addressed, I think.
And of course, I have to say we've gone about 35 or 40 minutes without mentioning COVID. But what impact has COVID had on your business? Have there been positives and negatives? And I guess what I'm thinking of is, for SMEs to engage in Industry 4.0 and new technologies, it requires investment in both time and funding. Is COVID and kind of focus on recovering from COVID going to be a major barrier in doing that to SMEs? Or I suppose there's two parts of the question there, but how has COVID impacted your business, and what do you think businesses should do to manage this?
Well, we've had two main effects. One is that some major projects have been deferred because people have obviously had to focus on COVID. So some of the bigger opportunities have been pushed down the line and sort of kicked down the road a bit. But on the other hand, we've had a lot of work, put in a lot of different COVID testers. There's new tests, there's new analyzers came online for doing COVID testing. A lot of the healthcare organizations bringing those in and connecting them to their laboratory information system. So we've been very busy supporting our customers. We've been very busy looking then at also how we can support them to make their job and improve their efficiency. One of our clients is based in a hospital based in Melbourne, and we were able to put in an SMS system to be able to send out notifications of people who had negative tests. That took a lot of work. Normally traditionally they've had to go give that to the GP. The GP would have phoned up the patient, but having gone to the patient directly took a lot of work out of their hands, and be able to improve their efficiency and the time that they needed that extra resource to focus on additional testing. So we've been scrambling to help sort of put out small fires. and support them with quite a dynamic environment. The new analyzers come online. Certain analyzers, there's shortages of analyte materials, so therefore we had to switch to analyzers. But the longer term project's been delayed. But now we're starting to see, particularly obviously Australia and New Zealand have come through the worst of COVID, that those bigger projects are starting to kick off again, and we hopefully will see the same here in UK and Ireland over the next year. We'll start to see the same here as well.
So I suppose the other part of the question then is in terms of companies that are, trying to recover perhaps from the impact of COVID, but also maybe looking to the opportunities that new technologies might bring for them, and looking to invest both time and money. I mean, how would you go about managing that and balancing that, or what advice would you give to SMEs?
Well, I mean, we didn't hit the pause button. We didn't have have the staff on furlough. We continued to drive forward our innovation program, continue to drive forward our product development, and we had all our staff engaged. And although we had to work remotely with them, I'm actually in our office here, and I've been coming in every day, even during COVID for the last year. But very few of our staff have come in because if they can work from home, they have worked from home. And so, we were, as a business, very fortunate that we could very easily adapt to be able to work from home. And we also, as a business, could see that, with COVID, I think it's only going to help our market and people focusing on the problems and the sort of infrastructure shortages that occur in pathology laboratories, that there will be more investment in that. So for our business, the outlook looks positive, and therefore we continue to invest and wanted to invest in developing our product further, and we took advantage of having working from home to keep pushing that forward. I think that the COVID will have impacts, and I probably it's difficult to appreciate all of those those impacts are going to be. People are much more likely to work from home. They're much more likely to engage with virtually. I just bought recently my Ocular Rift here. Not that my kids think it's for gaming, but I'm actually thinking that one of the things I miss most in virtual meetings like this is everything's 2D. I like, I think augmented reality and 3D meetings is going to be back on the agenda, and I would like to be able to have a meeting where you can sort of look to see somebody's side of somebody as well as somebody as a flat on the screen. So I think that there will be changes, and I think it will probably accelerate some of the technology changes that are coming anyway. But I do think then that people need to think about how can they apply those technology changes to their market, their domain, and for the benefit of their customers, which is going to be something which opens up a lot of opportunities. Unfortunately, probably it'll be difficult for a while as we come through, the sort of effect of this. But I think that hopefully we can build much better than what we had before, and with new opportunities for people we can focus on.
Great. And I suppose to put it to each of yourself and to Mary, like from your perspective, what kind of advice or last advice would you give to an SME in healthcare, in terms of engaging in new technologies or looking for opportunities in new technologies to develop maybe new business areas or that for an SME? Like, what advice would you give you as a kind of a lasting piece of advice?
Think global. We're part of the European Union. We have a big market out there. The technology has leveled a lot of the issues that we would have had in the past, language barriers and other factors. It's really about finding opportunities in that bigger market. It has to scale, and the benefits, will need to scale. So, don't just think about, what you need down the road or what your neighbour needs. Think about, globally, what is it that you can make a difference. And like I say, find that passion and stick with that passion, because, for new businesses, it's always going to be a tough journey. And unless you have that passion to sustain you, it will always be difficult.
Thank you. And Mary, from your perspectives on therapeutics and industry university collaboration, what advice would you give to SMEs?
First of all, engage with universities, go through the tech transfer offices perhaps, talk to you as somebody who's available, certainly at NUI Galway. I would also advise them to get on lists, for instance, for EU projects, European Union, Horizon 2020 funded projects. Get your name out there. That's a very good way to work with universities and other research organizations that will take your product, your testing system, to the point of being at the forefront of technology 4.0, being on these automated systems, giving the biologists the way to produce better products at less costs is another way that certainly automation, and we're engaging with companies now in Ireland on automation. We want to bring that technology to Ireland as cell therapy becomes more and more available. There are a number of SMEs now coming into Ireland in the context of gene therapy, for example. So we engage with them, and we get that information from Enterprise Ireland or sometimes from the IDA. So I think it's imperative that both the universities reach out, and that certainly that the agencies bringing in new companies inform them of where they can go to get help at the university level. And likewise, SMEs that are established engage through the universities or papers or whatever to make contact. I think certainly here in Galway, we're very able and willing to work with SMEs or multinationals, in fact, and have done that very successfully over the last 10 more years. So
there's a proven model there, really, of having worked with industry. So I think, from listening to both of you, from the diagnostics and therapeutics side, that it's the networks and the collaborations that companies make that are hugely important. And I suppose that there are roles for every member of the ecosystem, universities, SMEs, but also, of course, government agencies in facilitating those collaborations and networks to occur. I think we'll wrap it up there. And I just want to thank both of our panelists very much for joining us this morning, Professor Mary Murphy and Dr. Hugh Cormican, for joining us and giving your perspectives and insights. It's really interesting to hear the advancements that are being made around healthcare on both the therapy side and the diagnosis side. I also want to thank, of course, InterTradeIreland, who runs these events in collaboration with the partners in UI Galway, Whitaker Institute, Queen's University Belfast, UCC and DCU. And as I mentioned at the outset, we have a number of these Industry 4.0 events running. Last week we had one on the food sector, and you can see a recording of that from Queen's University Belfast. And on the 31st of March, we have the UCC Industry 4.0 event, which looks at Industry 4.0 and the circular economy. So if you check out your emails, and you will get notification on that. So thank you very much again to the panelists. Really appreciate you taking your time to talk to us today. And thank you all as well for joining us today, and have a good day. Thank you.